Review for The Bounty, 1984, with Mel Gibson, Anthony Hopkins. Oh, Laurence Olivier. Okay, that was him. Daniel Day-Lewis, Bernard Hill, Liam Neeson. Just an amazing cast. So, very interesting movie. I've never seen it before. I just watched it. Um, it's based on a true story. It's based on a true story. It's the director of the World's Fastest Indian, which I've seen, which is is okay. It's kind of a lighthearted movie with Anthony Hopkins again. He's trying to get this old motorcycle that's really fast to work, and he's trying to go to I think it's the Salt Dunes, and I don't know, is it Arizona or California, where they do races every couple of years? But anyways, he did Species too, the first Species. But this is the best movie I've seen that he's made. So I really enjoyed this movie. It's a true story. The synopsis: fed up with their captain's harsh discipline, a sailing ship crews decide to take action. So they have a mutiny. And it's, I don't know if it says the year, but it's in the 1700s, the late 1700s. I think it may be 1799. And Anthony Hopkins is a captain. He gets the task of going to, I believe it's Fiji, an island, to go trade with them to get breadfruit, which is like the plant, little plants of it, to get a bunch, as many as he can, to take that, and then to bring it back to England. Well, actually, to bring it to the Caribbean, I believe, to Jamaica, I think, and then they're going to plant it there, and then they're going to go back to England, and they're going to circumnavigate the globe. He really wants to do that. That's part of this. So his search for glory in some ways, but he gets this task, I think, from the king of England, and he has Daniel Day-Lewis, who he didn't really know, and he's his first mate. And Mel Gibson is a good friend of his, and I think they've served on a ship before. And he is basically like third in command. I forget the rank he is, but and Mel Gibson is down to do it, and they depart on their journey. And right in the beginning of the movie, they're kind of jumping back from like a trial. It's like a naval trial that they're having about the mutiny. They're questioning Anthony Hopkins. They're like reading, I think, maybe the ship logs and stuff. So right away, you know that there's a mutiny that's going to occur. Which is an interesting way to do the movie. It does kind of spoil that there's going to be a mutiny, but I mean, I don't know. Then it kind of is building tension, and you see how it gets there, because especially with Mel Gibson, and right away he says his character's name, and he says that he's a mutineer. He wants him killed. He wants all of them hanged. Anthony Hopkins, which you see why it's. And yeah, and it's interesting because they're close friends in the beginning of the movie, and they're excited to work together. And then throughout the movie, there's harsh weather, harsh seas. He's going around the Cape of Good Hope. So from England around the Cape of Good Hope to these islands in the Pacific, and then he's going to go to Jamaica around the Horn of South America. And both are treacherous, treacherous weather. They're famous for it. They're known for it. So when he's going around the Cape of Good Hope, in Africa, at first there's really good weather and they're excited. They think this is a good omen, but then right away, terrible weather hits. The ship is almost sank. Um, I think maybe a man or two dies, gets thrown overboard, and just brutal. Beautifully shot and filmed by the director and the cinematographer. Um, it's just this is a very good movie. It builds tension really well. Um, I don't know how it did box office wise, but just an amazing cast. And so there's all these problems they're having. You know, they're getting sick. Their doctor aboard is kind of he drinks way too much. He's not a very good doctor, not a very good surgeon. Daniel Day-Lewis right away is like, we should have a bigger boat because they have like a frigate and he wants a bigger boat. But Anthony Hopkins is a commander. He's not a captain, because I think he complains. He's like, well, the King of England or the Parliament or whatever decided to not make me a captain, so this is what we have, and this will be enough. So, I mean, the ship looks pretty big, but yeah, there's much bigger ones. Back then there's man o' wars, which are massive. I think they had like 130 gun cannons. This definitely doesn't have that. This is like a frigate. I don't know how many cannons it has, probably like 40 or something. But which is kind of a way to measure like the size of these ships. But still a beautiful ship, but maybe it wasn't big enough to do the journey. So they get past the Cape of Good Hope around Africa. They kind of barely survive, and then they get to the island and they're allied with the king, and he's friends with Anthony Hopkins. He's even friends with Admiral Cook, which is kind of a funny scene because he's like, how's Admiral Cook? And he's like, I have a picture that he gave me. He's my good friend. And by this time he's dead because he was killed, I think, in Hawaii, I believe. But Anthony Hopkins lies to him. He says he's alive and well. He says there's rumors that he's dead. He says no, no, no. And then later, it's interesting. It's all explained. He says, well, in their culture, they believe that all of the commanders of our ships are immortal. So, and we're all related too. So therefore, I'm immortal, and I would be related to Captain Cook. So him actually dying kind of makes it so that we're not immortal. It kind of makes me not look as powerful. So kind of interesting. But you could tell the king probably has his suspicions he's dead. Really good performance by the king too. I believe it's Fiji. So, and then, let's see. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's one of the islands on Fiji. But so they stay there a long time. Mel Gibson is he's supposed to be overseeing the breadfruit production of these small plants that they're going to take back. It's taking longer than expected. Anthony Hopkins is kind of angry about that. He wants to get going. Mel Gibson. Oh yeah, and then before this, Daniel Day-Lewis was demoted because he thought he was kind of cowardly. He was kind of being cruel to some of the men, Anthony Hopkins thought. He does a couple different things that Hopkins doesn't like. He doesn't think he has enough courage, so he demotes him. He makes Mel Gibson the second in command, he makes that guy, I think, third in command with Mel Gibson. So I mean, he completely embarrasses the guy, Daniel Day-Lewis, who kind of gives a subdued performance. He doesn't really say that much in this. But anyways, there's always interesting politics and power plays going on in the ship. And so he kind of humiliates Daniel Day-Lewis. And then, yeah, promotes his good friend, Mel Gibson. And, so they're in Fiji. They're taking too long. I think they're there for like 2 months more than they wanted to be. The men are really a lot of them are falling in love with a lot of the native women. Mel Gibson falls in love with a native woman who is a daughter of the king, and he really just falls for her. He's completely in love. He begins to not have dinner with Anthony Hopkins, which they're supposed to have a couple times a week. He kind of stops doing that. He stops kind of wearing his traditional British uniform, kind of just wearing like his shirt, and he begins to get tattoos too, like traditional Fiji tattoos. And he really doesn't want to leave, and a lot of the men don't want to leave either, because I mean it's beautiful there. You know, there's beautiful women. There's food. The Fiji the king is a very nice guy. You know, very open with his people, giving them food. There's these ceremonies of dances, and it really looks like a fun time. You know, I mean, it's compared to, you know, England, which is an island, but it's cold, it's wet, you know, it's dank, it's just totally different, you know, society. And they're all having a good time there, you know, beautiful shores, you know, swimming in the lagoons, eating tropical, you know, fruits, and yeah, a lot of them are falling in love with these women. So Anthony Hopkins isn't really happy with a lot of this. I mean, he doesn't really do anything about it because, you know, his men he wants to give them some rest and relaxation. They just had a terrible journey around Africa, and it was very brutal. But even his top officers are kind of disappointing him. So, anyways, finally are going to leave. They have the breadfruit. It takes up his cabin. He's going to sleep somewhere else, Anthony Hopkins. And some of the men leave in the middle of the night. They abandon ship. Liam Neeson's one of them. And which he says that, you know, the punishment for that is hanging. But they're gonna go to some of the other islands. They try to. Different tribes live there. They're not as friendly. So they're kind of they have to go back to the main island that they're on. Anthony Hopkins and his men, Daniel Day-Lewis, and I think Mel Gibson too. I mean, he's still loyal to him at this point. It's just there's some cracks appearing, and they find him, and Anthony Hopkins decides not to kill him, but he does. They do receive brutal whipping, very brutal scene, lashes on the back. So anyway, so they get them. They're back on the ship. And they leave, and the crew's unhappy. I mean, a lot of them really wanted to stay. So they leave, and Anthony Hopkins, kind of admonishes his officers when they're having dinner, saying he was very disappointed by how they acted. Mel Gibson showed up to one of the dinners, and he has all these tattoos that he just got and he doesn't have his jacket on. Anthony Hopkins is like, well, put your jacket on. He's like, well, I can't. It's really painful. You know, I just got these tattoos. He makes him do it, though, anyways. So, I don't know, you know, does he have to wear the jacket, Anthony Hopkins? But I get it. It's naval discipline. So, um, and yeah, I mean, I'm getting into spoilers now, so spoilers. But you know, they do give away the mutiny right away. I think the fun is kind of seeing the interactions of all these people and how this happens. But then he announces that they're going to go around the Horn of South America, which is very dangerous because he could go back around Africa, or I think maybe go further south and just avoid it. Better weather. That's what they want him to do. I think go further south, and then because you can go from England, you know, around Africa to Fiji. So then you can kind of take the same way, but go further south, avoid the bad weather. It will just take longer, and then go up to Jamaica, deliver what you got to, get resupplied, go back to England. But he doesn't want to do that. He wants to go around South America because he wants to circumnavigate the globe, which is a big thing for him. And they don't really care. And, you know, because, I mean, he'll get the glory, and they don't really care. So they're very angry about this. And then there are rumblings of mutiny that begin to appear. One of the officers kind of says to Mel Gibson, you know, he's like, I would just take the ship if I was you. And he's like, are you asking me to mutiny? He's like, that is a capital crime. And then he says, I'm just saying, I just take the ship. And he's like, well, why don't you? And he's like, well, I'm not you, and the men respect you. And this is like a lower officer. And also when they were in Fiji, their surgeon, their doctor died. It's not really explained how he died, but I think he just kind of kept drinking. He was very unhealthy. And he just kind of collapsed and died. So, but yeah, there's a mutiny. That's successful. They put Anthony Hopkins, Daniel Day-Lewis, who's still loyal to Anthony Hopkins after all of that. It's pretty amazing. But there's this whole thing, though, of like, I think Mel Gibson and Daniel Day-Lewis come from the upper echelons of society, very rich families. Anthony Hopkins didn't. He kind of came, I don't know if lower, but, you know, he said he's been on a ship since he was 12. So he's worked his way all the way up to be commander. I think he's commander, yeah. Then there's captain, and then there's admiral, who's like, you know, admiral of a whole fleet. But anyways, so Daniel Day-Lewis is still loyal to Anthony Hopkins. There's a really good line where, what does he say to Mel Gibson right when the mutiny happens? He says, I could barely command these men, and I had the full strength of the law of England behind me. He's like, what do you have? He's like, I'd watch your back. And it's brutal. They put them in a little ship, like a bunch of men, not many supplies, not much food, no maps either, because Mel Gibson takes all the maps, because he's like, well, I'm going to need these, because now I'm captain, our commander, you know, of this ship. And they send them off their way. A lot of them just wanted them to kill them. Mel Gibson wouldn't do it, though. And they send them on their way, and they are lost at sea. And by the way, this is a true story, which is just this is such a good movie. I was very impressed by it. And anyways, and they find their way to another island they get supplies. They barely got out of that island alive, though, because they weren't very friendly. They started to attack them. They started to take their jackets. They really wanted their jackets, which do look pretty cool. It's true. But then Mel Gibson is at sea too. He doesn't know where to go. Anywhere where there are ports for the British Navy, I mean, they will be killed. Even other countries would probably turn them in too. you know, that are allied with Britain, or even if you aren't, because like, you know, even if you're at war with Britain, well, you know, if you're a commander or a captain on a ship, you don't like mutineers. That is a very unhonorable thing to do. So, anyways, they find this island that only has, I think, the like the longitude recorded, so they wouldn't really be able to find it again. The British Navy, and they find this island and they set up shop there. Oh yeah, and they return to Fiji, and he gets his bride. A bunch of them bring on some other women and some other men. Um, that the king gives to him. He doesn't really want to, but then he says that he wants his daughter to come with him, and he says, well, at least let her choose. She chooses to go with him. So then after that, he's like, okay, fine, I'll give you supplies. I'll give you more men, because they've lost men, because some of them died from sickness. Some of them, I think, died in the storms. And then also, you know, a bunch of them are with Anthony Hopkins now. I mean, at least like a dozen or something. So, um, and yeah, they find this island, and they abandon ship. They take all the supplies off it, and they burn the ship down. And then that's kind of the end of the movie. And Anthony Hopkins barely makes it to. I'm not sure. I don't know if it says where, but somewhere I think in the Caribbean, they make it to a like a port. So they're saved. A few of them die though on their little ship. Um, and then in the end, it says that like 20 years later, an American ship found that little island that Mel Gibson and his men were on, and there was just one guy alive and like 30 women or something, and a bunch of children, and it says people still live there today from their descendants. So I don't know if that's true. That's pretty interesting, but really liked the movie. I thought it was very good. Check it out. It's a great cast. You know, it's a very young Mel Gibson. It's a very young Liam Neeson and Daniel Day-Lewis. Um, yeah, great movie. In the trivia, Mel Gibson was disappointed with his performance, he said. I think the main problem with that film was that it tried to be a fresh look at the dynamic of the mutiny situation, but didn't go far enough. In the old version, Captain Bligh was the bad guy and Fletcher Christian was the good guy, but really Fletcher Christian was a social climber and an opportunist. They should have made him the bad guy, which indeed he was. He ended up sending up all these people adrift to die without any real justification. Maybe he gone island crazy. They should have, this is a quote from Gibson, they should have painted it in that way. But they wanted to exonerate Captain Bligh, still having the dynamic where the guy was mutinying for the good of the crew. It didn't quite work. Yeah. I don't think I really agree with that. Because I think it would be kind of like that. I mean, obviously you could just have a terrible commander that's completely incompetent and is cruel and all these things, but that's not really the situation here. In the end, I think he did make the wrong choice trying to circumnavigate the globe for glory. That I think was a huge mistake. He should have just took the easy way home. I mean, easy is still very difficult, but which, you know, now we have airplanes, and it's just I mean, back then is so difficult. Being in the Navy, being on these ships, it was a brutal existence. But he should have just done that. He should have gone south of Africa, leave Fiji, go south of Africa. I think what I think they say is you go south, then you kind of hit Australia. So maybe there's a port there. You could, you know, get resupplied on the west side of Australia, and then you kind of boomerang or shoot your way up into the Caribbean, go to Jamaica, then go back to England. I think that's probably would have been the safest way to go, but he didn't. He chose not to do that, and his men were already angry, disgruntled, you know. So I think that was the wrong choice. But the movie is generally regarded as the most accurate depiction of the actual mutiny. The movie was originally supposed to have been made in 1975, when Sir Anthony Hopkins would have been closer in age to the real Bligh. Oh, one significant historical event which is completely omitted from the movie is the initial attempt by Fletcher Christian, it's Mel Gibson, and the mutineers to found a colony on the island of Tubuai, south of Tahiti. Okay, maybe they're on Tahiti, but Fletcher Christian landed on Tubuai shortly after the mutiny, and after finding nearly 3,000 hostile natives, established a fort on the northern side of the island using weaponry from the Bounty. After nearly 2 months of constant skirmishes with the natives, Christian and the mutineers abandoned the island and only then returned to Tahiti for more men and supplies before heading east towards, Pitcairn, which is where they end up. Thomas Birkin, who had been severely wounded on Tubuai fighting natives, stayed behind in Tahiti, even though he was clearly a mutineer and would have been hanged and refined by the Royal Navy. Burkhardt was in fact captured and executed for mutiny. Captain William Bligh's later career was peppered with future mutinies and complaints about his oppressive attitude. His tyrannical nature later sparked the Rum Rebellion in New South Wales in 1808, which led to him being forcibly deported. Oh, wow. Mel Gibson described the making of the movie as difficult because of the long production and bad weather. I went mad. They would hold their breath at night when I went off. One night I had a fight in a bar. The next day they had to shoot only one side of my face because the other was so messed up. If you see the film, you can see the swelling in certain scenes. But I think it's about it. I really like the movie. I think it's an interesting time period. These are movies that aren't really made that much anymore. They're hard to shoot, especially if you are shooting on water, which they are. There's no CGI back then. Another good movie that is kind of totally different, but it's naval combat is Master and Commander. I really like that movie too. So yeah, check it out. The Bounty, 1984, amazing cast. I think very well made. So, but yeah, that's about it. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.